A black woman marries a poor disabled man, but at the wedding she learns a shocking truth. What was her fiancé hiding? Subscribe and find out how it ends. Daniela adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag as she stepped into the familiar scent of old books and polished wood. The local library was one of the few places in her neighborhood that felt like a sanctuary, quiet, inviting, and far removed from the noise of the streets outside. It wasn't often that she had time to visit between balancing her job as a waitress and her evening college classes, but today was special. Her younger brother, Marcus, had begged her to find a rare sci-fi book he'd been obsessing over, and she couldn't say no to him. The library's tall shelves stretched towards the ceiling, creating a maze of knowledge. Daniela wandered through them with purpose, her fingers trailing across the spines of well-worn books. Her thoughts drifted to Marcus. At just 12 years old, he was already devouring novels about space exploration and dystopian futures. She admired his curiosity and wanted to encourage it, even if it meant carving time out of her packed schedule. Lost in thought, she nearly bumped into a cart stacked with books. "Careful there," a warm, calm voice said. Daniela looked up to see a man sitting in a wheelchair, his hands resting lightly on the rim of the wheels. He had sandy blonde hair, neatly combed, and intelligent green eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His navy blue sweater and crisp khakis gave him an unassuming but put-together appearance. "Sorry," she said quickly, stepping back. "I wasn't paying attention." "It's okay," he replied with a small smile. "You looked like you were on a mission. Can I help you find something?" Daniela hesitated. There was something about his demeanor, gentle, approachable, that made her want to trust him. "Actually, yes. I'm looking for a book. Galactic Empires, Volume 2. My little brother's been asking for it." The man's face lit up. "Good choice. It's on the top shelf in the sci-fi section. I can show you." Daniela followed him as he navigated the aisles with ease, his movements smooth and practiced. He reached the section and pointed to a shelf above their heads. "There it is." Daniela glanced up and frowned. Figures it'd be out of reach. Without hesitation, he wheeled over to a step stool nearby, locked his chair in place, and gestured to it. "Here you go." She climbed the stool, grabbing the book and turning it over in her hands. "Got it," she said, hopping down and giving him a grateful smile. "Thanks. Logan," he said, extending a hand. "And you are?" "Daniela," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but not overwhelming. "Nice to meet you, Daniela. Are you into sci-fi too, or is this just for your brother?" She chuckled. "Definitely just for him. I like stories, but my taste is more realistic." "Fair enough," Logan said. "I think we all need a little escape sometimes, though, even if it's just for a few hours." Daniela nodded, unsure why his words struck a chord with her. There was a weight to them, as if he spoke from experience. Before she could think too much about it, he gestured to a table nearby. "If you're not in a hurry, I'd love to hear what kind of stories you do like. Always looking for recommendations." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the clock on the wall. She still had time before her shift started, and there was something disarming about Logan's presence, something that made her want to sit down and talk to him. "Okay," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "But don't blame me if you end up with a list too long to handle." Logan smiled, and for the next hour they talked. Daniela told him about her love for memoirs and historical fiction, and Logan shared his passion for philosophy and poetry. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and moments of thoughtful silence. It was only when Daniela's phone buzzed with a reminder for her shift that she realized how much time had passed. "I should go," she said, standing and slipping the book into her bag. "Thanks for the help and the company." "Anytime," Logan replied, his smile warm. "And if you ever need more book recommendations, you know where to find me." As Daniela walked out of the library, she couldn't shake the feeling that their conversation had been different, genuine. It wasn't often she met someone who listened so intently, who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. What she didn't see was Logan watching her leave, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. For him, too, their meeting had felt unusual. It wasn't just her sharp wit or her easy laugh, it was the way she carried herself, with a quiet strength that intrigued him. Logan wheeled back to his usual spot behind the desk, his mind still on the woman who'd walked into his library and left with more than just a book. Neither of them knew it yet, but that chance encounter was the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. The morning sunlight poured through Daniela's apartment window as she stirred sugar into her coffee. Her thoughts lingered on her conversation with Logan the day before. She hadn't meant to spend so much time at the library, but talking to him had been refreshing. There was a sincerity about him, a warmth that felt rare in her world. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. Life was busy enough without adding complicated feelings to the mix. Her phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her attention. It was her best friend, Tasha. "Girl, are you still coming to brunch, or do I need to drag you out of that cave you call an apartment?" Tasha's teasing tone came through loud and clear. I'm coming," Daniela replied, rolling her eyes. "Give me 15 minutes. As she hurried to get ready, Daniela decided she wouldn't mention Logan to Tasha. Not yet, anyway. She wasn't sure what there was to say, and she didn't want to deal with the inevitable questions. For now, their meeting would remain her little secret. Brunch at the local diner was a weekly ritual for Daniela and Tasha. They sat in their usual booth by the window, the scent of bacon and fresh coffee wafting around them. Tasha sipped her mimosa and studied Daniela with a raised eyebrow. "You seem distracted. Spill it." Daniela sighed. "It's nothing. Just busy with work and school, you know." "Uh-huh." Tasha leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Don't lie to me. I know that look. Is it a guy?" Daniela hesitated, then decided to give a vague answer. "I met someone. He's interesting." Tasha's eyes lit up. "Interesting how? Cute? Rich? What's the story?" "He's nice," Daniela said, trying to downplay it. "Really smart. We met at the library." "The library? Girl, is he a nerd? Please tell me he's not one of those weird conspiracy theorists." Daniela laughed. "No, he's not weird, just different." Tasha tilted her head, sensing there was more to the story. "Okay, different how?" Daniela hesitated again. She didn't want to get into the details of Logan's wheelchair or the deeper connection she'd felt during their conversation. "He's just someone I'm getting to know, that's all." Tasha let it go for now, but Daniela could tell her friend wasn't satisfied. As they finished their meal, Daniela's thoughts kept drifting back to Logan. Over the next few weeks, Daniela and Logan continued to see each other. Their meetings at the library turned into coffee dates and long walks through the park. Logan's wheelchair didn't slow him down. He maneuvered it with ease, and his confidence made Daniela feel at ease too. She found herself looking forward to their time together, eager to share pieces of her world and learn more about his. But not everyone was as accepting of their growing bond. One evening, Daniela brought Logan to a small family gathering. It was supposed to be a casual dinner, just her mother and a few relatives. She'd warned Logan about her family's sometimes blunt demeanor, but nothing could have prepared her for the tension that filled the room when they arrived. Her mother, Evelyn, greeted Logan politely but coolly. Her younger cousins whispered to each other, stealing curious glances at his wheelchair, and her Uncle Roy didn't bother hiding his skepticism. "So, Logan," Roy said over dinner, his tone loaded, "what do you do for a living?" "I work at the library," Logan replied calmly. "I've been there for a few years now." "A librarian, huh?" Roy raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't pay much, does it?" "Uncle Roy," Daniela said sharply, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment, "that's not appropriate." "I'm just saying," Roy continued, shrugging. "Daniela's worked hard to get where she is. She deserves someone who can keep up with her." Logan remained composed, but Daniela could see the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. She reached for his hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. After dinner, as they walked to Logan's car, Daniela let out an exasperated sigh. "I'm so sorry about my uncle. He's always like that, sticking his nose where it doesn't belong." "It's okay," Logan said with a small smile. "I've dealt with worse." Daniela stopped and looked at him, her frustration turning into something softer. "You shouldn't have to deal with that. Not from my family, not from anyone." Logan shrugged, his expression unreadable. "People are going to judge. It's just how the world is." For the first time, Daniela felt the weight of what it must be like for Logan, to constantly face assumptions and prejudice, to be seen for his wheelchair before anything else. It made her admire him even more, but it also planted a seed of doubt in her mind. Could she handle the scrutiny and the challenges that came with being with someone like Logan? As their relationship deepened, Daniela found herself facing judgment not just from her family, but also from strangers. When she and Logan walked through the park or went to a restaurant, she noticed the stares. Some were curious, others pitying, and a few outright disapproving. Once, a man even whispered to his companion, loud enough for Daniela to hear, "What's she doing with him?" The comments hurt more than Daniela wanted to admit. She tried to brush them off, to focus on the moments when she and Logan were alone, laughing and talking like the rest of the world didn't exist. But the doubts lingered, creeping in during the quiet moments. Logan, too, noticed her hesitation. He didn't say anything, but he began to wonder if their relationship could survive the pressures of the outside world. He loved how strong and kind Daniela was, but a small nagging voice in the back of his mind told him she might not stay. For Daniela, the question wasn't whether she loved Logan. She did, deeply, in a way that scared her. The real question was whether their love was strong enough to withstand everything trying to pull them apart. As she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't help but wonder if she was strong enough to fight for what they had. Their relationship was growing, but so were the challenges, and neither of them could yet see the tests that lay ahead. The sound of rain drumming against the library windows created a soothing rhythm as Logan adjusted the stack of books on his desk. It had been a quiet morning, with only a handful of visitors wandering through the aisles. He usually enjoyed the calm, but today his thoughts were restless. Daniela had been on his mind more than usual, and not just because of their growing connection. It was the questions and doubts gnawing at him that refused to go away. Could someone like Daniela, a vibrant, ambitious woman, truly want a future with someone like him? He had spent his entire life learning to navigate the world's judgments, but with her, the stakes felt higher. Her warmth and sincerity had drawn him in, But now he found himself wondering if her feelings could withstand the pressures and prejudices they both faced. He pushed the thoughts aside when the bell above the library's entrance jingled. Daniela stepped in, shaking droplets of rain from her umbrella. She spotted Logan at his desk and flashed him a smile that momentarily melted his worries. "You're a sight for sore eyes," she said, approaching his desk. "Busy day?" "Not really," Logan replied, his lips curving into a soft smile. "Just me and the books. You?" "Long shift at the diner," Daniela said, setting her bag down. "I thought I'd swing by and say hi before heading home." Her presence lit up the room, but as they settled into conversation, Logan's doubts crept back. He had been wrestling with the idea of testing her feelings, creating situations to see how she would react under pressure. It wasn't something he was proud of, but fear had a way of clouding his better judgment. That evening, as they strolled through the park together, Logan decided to put his first test into motion. It began subtly. Logan invited Daniela to a dinner gathering with a few of his friends, people she hadn't met before. He knew these friends weren't exactly welcoming to new faces, particularly someone like Daniela, whose background and appearance didn't align with their narrow view of the world. Daniela sensed the tension the moment they walked into the apartment. The conversation was polite but stilted, the kind of surface-level chatter that masked deeper discomfort. One of Logan's friends, a woman named Claire, asked pointedly, "So, Daniela, what do you do?" "I'm a waitress," Daniela replied evenly, "and I'm studying social work." Claire arched an eyebrow. "Social work? That's noble. But doesn't it take a long time to establish a career in that field?" Daniela felt the subtle jab but kept her composure. "It does, but it's worth it to help people who really need it." Claire smiled tightly. "Well, good for you." Logan watched the exchange carefully, noting the flicker of discomfort in Daniela's eyes. She didn't say anything about it on the drive home, but he could tell the evening had bothered her. The second test came a week later. Logan pretended that his wheelchair had developed a mechanical issue, making it harder for him to move around. He wanted to see how Daniela would handle the idea of being with someone who might become more dependent on her over time. Daniela noticed immediately when Logan struggled to get through doorways and maneuver around the park during their next outing. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern etched across her face. "Yeah," Logan said with a forced smile. "The chair's acting up. I'll get it fixed soon." Daniela didn't hesitate to step in. She stayed close, offering to help him navigate uneven sidewalks and even suggesting they cut their walk short. Her patience and kindness touched him, but the guilt of his deception weighed heavily. That night, Logan lay awake, replaying the day's events. Daniela's care and understanding only deepened his feelings for her, but it also made him question his actions. Was it fair to test her like this? Was he sabotaging their relationship out of his own insecurities? Meanwhile, Daniela began to notice a pattern in their interactions. Logan seemed to be placing her in increasingly difficult situations, and while she hadn't connected the dots, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. During a late-night phone call with Tasha, Daniela voiced her concerns. "It's like, he's pushing me, testing me maybe. I don't know how to explain it." Tasha didn't hold back. "Girl, if he's making you feel like you have to prove yourself, that's a red flag. You're amazing. And if he can't see that without putting you through hoops, maybe he's not the one." Daniela sighed. "It's not that simple, Tasha. He's been through a lot. I think he's just scared." "Scared or not, he needs to figure his stuff out," Tasha said firmly. "You can't be the only one carrying this relationship." Daniela knew her friend was right, but the thought of confronting Logan made her stomach twist. She didn't want to push him away, but she also didn't want to feel like she was constantly proving her worth. The third test was unintentional. Logan's guilt over his actions began to manifest in subtle ways. He became quieter, more withdrawn, and Daniela noticed. She tried to pull him out of it, but the tension between them was growing. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline, Daniela finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Logan, what's going on?" she asked softly. "You've been distant lately." Logan hesitated, his hands resting on the wheels of his chair. "It's nothing. Just thinking about things." "Like what?" Daniela pressed. He looked at her, his green eyes filled with a mixture of love and fear. "Like whether I'm enough for you." The honesty in his words caught her off guard. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You are enough, Logan, but you have to let me in. I can't keep guessing what's on your mind." Logan nodded, but the weight of his secrets remained. He wanted to believe her, to trust her completely, but the walls he had built around himself were hard to tear down. As their relationship continued, the strain became more evident. Daniela felt the pressure of Logan's unspoken doubts, and Logan struggled with the consequences of his tests. They loved each other deeply, but the cracks in their foundation were growing wider. Neither of them knew that the truth, when it finally came out, would test their love in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The evening sun bathed Daniela's apartment in a warm, golden glow as she sat cross-legged on her living room floor, organizing a stack of old photos for a family project. Marcus, her younger brother, was sprawled on the couch nearby, engrossed in a sci-fi novel she'd borrowed from the library. She glanced at him occasionally, smiling to herself at how absorbed he was in the story. Moments like this, quiet and uncomplicated, were rare, and Daniela cherished them. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she reached for it, expecting a message from Tasha. Instead, it was Logan. "Hey, want to come by for dinner tonight? I'll cook." Daniela smiled, her heart warming at the thought. Logan's cooking was surprisingly good for someone who claimed to be just a guy with a microwave and a few pans. She quickly replied, "Sounds perfect. Be there at 7. Later that evening, Daniela arrived at Logan's modest apartment, carrying a bottle of wine she'd picked up on her way. Logan greeted her at the door, his usual warm smile in place, and invited her in. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with books, framed photos, and the faint aroma of something delicious simmering in the kitchen. As Daniela set the wine on the counter, her eyes drifted to a photo on the bookshelf she hadn't noticed before. It showed a much younger Logan standing beside an elegant woman in an ornate garden. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his posture confident, his smile wide. The setting was grand, definitely not the kind of place that matched Logan's current life. She picked up the frame, curiosity tugging at her. "Who's this?" Logan glanced over from the stove, his expression momentarily guarded. "That's me and my mom, a long time ago." Daniela studied the photo, noting the luxury of the setting. "This looks fancy. Where was this?" Logan hesitated, his hand pausing mid-stir. "At her family's estate." "Estate?" Daniela raised an eyebrow. That's not exactly a word most people use to describe their childhood home. Logan chuckled nervously and turned back to the stove. "Yeah, well, it's a part of my life I don't really talk about." Daniela sensed his discomfort and decided not to press further. But the photo lingered in her mind, raising questions she didn't yet have the answers to. Over the next few weeks, Daniela began noticing more inconsistencies in Logan's modest lifestyle. During a visit to his apartment, she spotted a watch on his dresser. Sleek and understated, but clearly expensive. She didn't say anything at the time, but it stuck with her. Another time, as they walked through the park, Logan casually mentioned a novel he'd read about corporate mergers. When she asked why he found it interesting, he brushed it off with a vague response, but his knowledge on the subject seemed too detailed for someone who worked at a library. The final clue came during a rainy afternoon. Daniela and Logan were at a coffee shop, sharing a quiet moment over lattes. Logan's phone buzzed with a call, and Daniela couldn't help but glance at the screen. The name on the caller ID read Winston Holdings. "Who's Winston Holdings?" she asked casually as he declined the call. Logan's jaw tightened slightly. "Just an old family connection." Daniela didn't push, but the name stuck in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that Logan was hiding something significant. One evening, while Logan was in the kitchen preparing tea, Daniela's curiosity got the better of her. She wandered over to his bookshelf, scanning the spines of the volumes arranged neatly in rows. Her eyes landed on a thick, leather-bound book with a title embossed in gold: The Art of Negotiation: Insights from Global Business Leaders. She pulled it out and flipped it open, finding handwritten notes in the margins, sharp, insightful comments that hinted at a deep understanding of high-level finance. When Logan returned with 2 mugs of tea, he found her holding the book. His face froze for a moment before he set the mugs down. "This is interesting," Daniela said, gesturing to the book. "You've got some pretty detailed notes in here." Logan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just something I like to read about." "But why? You've never mentioned an interest in business before." He hesitated, the tension in his posture unmistakable. "It's not something I talk about often." "Logan," Daniela said gently, setting the book aside, "I feel like there's a part of you I don't know. You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I need to feel like I'm not being kept in the dark." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Logan looked like he might tell her the truth. But then he shook his head. "It's nothing you need to worry about, I promise." Daniela didn't push further, but doubt began to creep into her mind. She wanted to trust him, to believe that he would open up to her when he was ready. But the unanswered questions weighed on her, and she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Logan was holding something back. As their relationship continued, Daniela tried to focus on the present, on the moments they shared, but the clues she'd gathered lingered in her mind, forming a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. Logan, meanwhile, was acutely aware of her growing suspicions. He told himself he was protecting her, that his secret would only complicate things, yet deep down, he knew the truth would eventually come out, and when it did, it might destroy everything they had built. For now, they both held their silence, each hoping the weight of unspoken truths wouldn't be too much to bear. But the cracks in their relationship were growing wider, and the secrets between them threatened to unravel the fragile bond they had worked so hard to create. The early spring sun filtered through Daniela's window as she scrolled through wedding venues on her laptop. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement and nerves. Logan had proposed just a week ago, and the memory still felt surreal. They'd been walking through their favorite park, the cherry blossoms overhead casting a soft pink glow, when he'd stopped, taken her hand, and asked her to marry him. No grand speeches, no over-the-top gestures, just Logan, speaking from his heart. It was perfect. Yet, as perfect as the moment had been, the road ahead was already proven to be anything but smooth. The first challenge came during a dinner with her family. Daniela had hoped that sharing the news of her engagement would bring everyone together, but her mother, Evelyn, greeted the announcement with pursed lips and a guarded tone. "Marriage is a big commitment, Daniela," Evelyn said, setting her fork down. "Are you sure you're ready for everything this will mean? Logan's situation isn't exactly easy." Daniela stiffened. "What do you mean by his situation, Mom?" "You know what I mean," Evelyn said, her voice soft but firm. "He's in a wheelchair. That's going to affect your life in ways you might not even realize yet." "I love him, Mom," Daniela replied, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "That's all that matters." Her Uncle Roy, as always, felt compelled to add his opinion. "Love's great and all, but let's be real here. You're taking on a lot of responsibility. Are you sure you've thought this through?" Daniela clenched her fists under the table, willing herself to stay calm. She looked at her younger brother, Marcus, who offered her an encouraging smile. At least he was on her side. After dinner, Daniela confronted her mother privately. "Why can't you just be happy for me?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Evelyn sighed. "I'm happy for you, Daniela. I just worry. I don't want you to end up in a situation where you feel trapped." "I'm not trapped," Daniela said firmly. "Logan makes me happy. He's kind, thoughtful, and he loves me for who I am. That's more than I can say for most men." Evelyn didn't argue further, but the conversation left a lingering bitterness in Daniela's heart. She wanted her family to share in her joy, not weigh it down with doubts. Logan, meanwhile, faced his own challenges. His small group of friends had mixed reactions to the engagement. Most offered their congratulations, but a few raised eyebrows at the idea of Logan marrying someone from such a different background. "Are you sure this is what you want, Logan?" Claire asked during a coffee meeting. "I mean, Daniela's great, but have you thought about the long term? What happens if you two don't see eye to eye on bigger things?" Logan's jaw tightened. "I'm marrying her because I love her, Claire, not because I need your approval." Claire held up her hands in mock surrender. Okay. I'm just saying, it's a lot to think about." Logan didn't respond, but the conversation left him uneasy. He hated how people seemed to focus on what could go wrong rather than celebrating what they'd built together. Still, he couldn't shake the guilt of his own deception. Every moment they spent planning their future together reminded him that Daniela didn't know the whole truth. As the weeks passed, wedding preparations took center stage. Daniela threw herself into planning with a determination that surprised even her. She wanted everything to be perfect, not for the guests, but for herself and Logan. She spent hours poring over floral arrangements, color schemes, and seating charts, doing her best to ignore the whispers of doubt from those around her. Logan was supportive, but his enthusiasm felt muted at times. Daniela noticed, but she chalked it up to nerves. After all, weddings were a big deal. She assumed he was just overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. One evening, as they sat in her apartment surrounded by fabric swatches and catering menus, Daniela looked up from her laptop. "Do you think we're crazy for doing this?" Logan smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe a little, but sometimes crazy is good." She laughed, but the moment didn't entirely ease her worries. There was a part of her that sensed Logan was holding something back, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. The tension came to a head during a meeting with the florist. Daniela had chosen a small, family-owned shop known for its unique arrangements. She and Logan met with the owner, a kind, older woman who listened attentively as Daniela described her vision for the ceremony. As they discussed details, Logan's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, his expression tightening for a brief moment before he silenced the call. Daniela caught a glimpse of the screen. Winston Holdings. "Everything okay?" she asked as they left the shop. "Yeah," Logan said quickly. "Just a call I need to return later." Daniela nodded, but the name stayed with her. It wasn't the first time she'd seen it, and she couldn't help but wonder what connection Logan had to a company she knew nothing about. Later that night, as Daniela lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She loved Logan deeply, but the unanswered questions were starting to pile up. Why did he avoid talking about his past? What was the real story behind his connection to Winston Holdings? And why did she feel like there was a part of him she would never fully understand? Logan, in his own apartment, stared at the ceiling. He knew the weight of his secret was growing heavier with each passing day. The wedding was just weeks away, and he hadn't yet found the courage to tell Daniela the truth. He told himself he was protecting her, but deep down, he knew that his silence was a betrayal of the trust they'd built. The clock was ticking, and the closer they got to their wedding day, the more fragile their relationship felt. Both of them were fighting to hold on to the love they'd found, but neither of them could see the storm that was about to break. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and bright, with the sunlight streaming through Daniela's bedroom window like a promise. She sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection as her best friend, Tasha, carefully arranged her hair. The dress, simple but elegant, with delicate lace sleeves, hung on the back of the door, waiting for its moment. Daniela's heart raced with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but there was a nervous energy she couldn't shake. She had spent the last few weeks drowning in details, trying to block out the doubts and questions that had been swirling in her mind. But now, on the brink of forever, the weight of everything felt almost overwhelming. "Girl, you look like you're about to bolt," Tasha said, catching her gaze in the mirror. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Daniela forced a small smile. "Just nerves. I guess it's normal, right?" "Totally," Tasha said, securing the last pin in her hair. "But if you're having second thoughts, now's the time to say something. Once you walk down that aisle, there's no turning back." "I'm not having second thoughts," Daniela said quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. "I love Logan." Tasha stepped back, studying her friend with a critical eye. "Then focus on that. Forget about what everyone else thinks. This day is about you and him." Daniela nodded, but her thoughts remained restless. There was so much she loved about Logan, his kindness, his humor, the way he made her feel truly seen. But there were also the lingering questions, the sense that he was holding something back. She had convinced herself it didn't matter, that love was enough to overcome anything. Yet, deep down, a small voice whispered, "Are you sure?" Meanwhile, Logan sat in the small dressing room at the church, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His suit was perfectly tailored, every detail meticulously chosen by Daniela. He looked calm, composed, but inside he was anything but. The weight of his secret felt unbearable now. For months he had convinced himself that his lie was necessary, that it was the only way to protect what they had built. But as he thought about Daniela, her trust, her unwavering belief in him, he felt the full force of his betrayal. "You good?" asked his best man Jeremy, poking his head into the room. Logan nodded, though his voice came out strained. "Yeah, just thinking about how lucky you are." Jeremy grinned. "She's amazing, man. Don't mess this up." Logan managed a weak smile as Jeremy disappeared down the hall. "Don't mess this up." The words echoed in his mind like a taunt. He knew he had already messed it up more than anyone could imagine. As the clock ticked closer to the ceremony, Logan made a decision. He couldn't go through with this without telling Daniela the truth. She deserved to know everything, even if it meant risking everything. He just prayed she could find it in her heart to forgive him. The church was filled with a quiet hum of anticipation as guests took their seats. The pews were adorned with soft white flowers, and sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. Daniela's family sat near the front, their expressions a mixture of pride and apprehension. Logan's friends were scattered among the guests, their polite smiles hiding their own doubts. Daniela stood at the back of the church, clutching her father's arm. Her hands trembled slightly, but she took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. The music began, a soft, melodic tune that signaled her entrance. As the doors opened, all eyes turned toward her. The aisle stretched out before her like a path to a new life. She focused on Logan, standing at the altar, his gaze locked on hers. He looked handsome and steady, but there was something in his eyes, an intensity, a vulnerability, that made her heart skip a beat. She couldn't read it, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Step by step, she moved closer, her father guiding her with gentle strength. When they reached the altar, he kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Logan's. The warmth of Logan's touch was familiar, grounding, but she could feel a slight tremor in his fingers. The priest began to speak, his voice calm and steady, but Logan barely heard him. His thoughts were racing, every nerve in his body screaming at him to stop this, to say the words that had been trapped inside him for so long. "Before we proceed," Logan said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. The priest paused, the room falling into stunned silence. Daniela turned to him, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. Logan took a deep breath, his hands tightening around hers. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, but Logan ignored them, his focus solely on Daniela. Her eyes searched his, a mixture of concern and fear. "I've been lying to you," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm not who you think I am." Daniela froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you talking about?" Logan hesitated, then forced himself to continue. "I'm not disabled. The wheelchair, it was never real. I can walk." The gasps from the crowd were audible, a ripple of shock spreading through the room. Daniela's knees felt weak, her mind struggling to process his words. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because I needed to know if someone could love me for me. Not for what I look like, not for what I have." He took another breath, his voice breaking. "I'm also not poor, Daniela. My family is wealthy, very wealthy, but I didn't want that to define me. I didn't want it to define us." The room was deathly silent as Daniela stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal, confusion, anger, all of it churned inside her, threatening to overwhelm her. "You lied to me," she said finally, her voice shaking. "This whole time, everything was a lie." "Not everything," Logan said desperately. "My love for you is real. That's the only thing that's real, I swear." Daniela pulled her hands away, stepping back. She felt the eyes of the crowd on her, but she didn't care. All she could focus on was the man in front of her, the man she thought she knew. "I need time," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to think." Without another word, she turned and walked down the aisle, her steps echoing in the stunned silence. Logan watched her go, his heart breaking, knowing he might have just lost the one person who truly mattered. As the doors closed behind her, the whispers in the crowd grew louder, but Logan didn't hear them. All he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat, pounding in his chest like a clock counting down to an uncertain future. The sound of her heels echoed sharply against the stone floor as Daniela hurried down the church corridor, her vision blurred by tears. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her as she had walked away from the altar, but she didn't care. The man she thought she was about to marry had unraveled her world with a single confession. She needed air, space, anything to make sense of the storm raging inside her. She pushed open the heavy wooden door at the back of the church and stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. The distant hum of city life contrasted starkly with the stillness in her heart. Daniela leaned against the wall, her hands trembling as she pressed her palms to her face, trying to calm herself. But the questions came faster than she could silence them. How could he do this? How could Logan, the one person she trusted more than anyone, deceive her so completely? "Daniela," a familiar voice called. She turned to see Tasha jogging toward her, her bridesmaid dress rustling with each step. Tasha's expression was a mix of concern and fury. "Don't," Daniela said, holding up a hand. I can't talk right now." Tasha ignored her, stopping just a foot away. "What the hell happened in there? Everyone's freaking out. Are you okay?" Daniela let out a hollow laugh. "Am I okay? My fiancé just told me he's been lying to me about everything. Who he is, what he is. So no, Tasha, I'm not okay." Tasha's eyes widened. "What do you mean, everything? What's going on?" Daniela took a shaky breath and explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. She told Tasha about Logan's confession, how he wasn't actually disabled, how he came from wealth, and how he had kept all of it hidden from her. With every word, her voice grew more unsteady, the reality of it all sinking deeper into her bones. Tasha listened, her expression hardening with each revelation. When Daniela finished, Tasha crossed her arms. I don't even know what to say. What kind of person does that?" "A liar," Daniela said bitterly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Someone who doesn't trust me enough to tell the truth." "But why would he do that?" Tasha asked, her tone incredulous. "I mean, what was he even trying to prove?" Daniela shook her head. "He said he wanted to see if someone could love him for who he is, not his money or his looks. But all he's done is make me question everything." "Do you still love him?" Tasha's question was blunt, cutting through the haze of Daniela's thoughts. Daniela froze, the weight of the question hitting her like a tidal wave. Did she still love Logan? The answer wasn't simple. She loved the man she thought he was, the one who had made her laugh, listened to her dreams, and supported her through every challenge. But now, she wasn't sure if that man had ever really existed. "I don't know," Daniela admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what's real anymore." Inside the church, Logan sat alone in the now empty sanctuary. The guests had left in a flurry of murmurs and awkward glances, and even the priest had quietly retreated. Logan stared at the altar, the place where everything had unraveled. He felt like he was suffocating under the weight of his own choices. Jeremy entered the room, his steps hesitant. "Logan," he said cautiously, "man, what were you thinking?" "I wasn't," Logan said, his voice hollow. "I thought I was protecting us. I thought, if I told her before the wedding, she'd leave, but I didn't realize how much worse it would be to tell her like this. Jeremy sat down beside him. Look, I'm not going to pretend to understand what you were trying to do, but if you love her, and I mean really love her, you need to fix this. How? Logan asked, his voice breaking. She doesn't even want to look at me right now. Jeremy clapped a hand on his shoulder. Give her time. But when she's ready to talk, you better be ready to explain yourself. No more lies, no more excuses, just the truth. Logan nodded, though his heart felt heavy with uncertainty. He didn't know if Daniela would ever forgive him, but he knew he had to try. That evening, Daniela sat alone in her apartment, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The wedding dress hung in the corner, a silent reminder of everything that had happened. She stared at the floor, her mind a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, and, beneath it all, love. She hated that she still loved him, even after everything. But love wasn't something you could switch off. It lingered, even when it hurt. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she glanced at the screen. It was Logan. She stared at his name for a long moment, her heart pounding. Finally, she let the call go to voicemail. Moments later, a text appeared. I'm so sorry, Daniela. Please let me explain. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. She didn't reply. She couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she curled up on the couch, tears streaming down her face as she tried to figure out what to do. The days that followed were quiet but heavy. Daniela avoided calls from friends and family, needing time to process everything. She replayed Logan's confession in her mind over and over, trying to make sense of it. His words had been desperate, full of regret, but they couldn't erase the betrayal she felt. One afternoon, while walking through the park to clear her head, she found herself at the bench where Logan had proposed. The memory of that moment, how happy she'd been, how sure she'd felt, brought fresh tears to her eyes. She sat down, staring at the ground, and whispered to herself, "Why couldn't you just trust me?" Meanwhile, Logan threw himself into writing her a letter. He poured his heart onto the pages, explaining everything, his fears, his insecurities, his reasons for hiding the truth. He didn't know if she would ever read it, but it was all he could think to do. When the letter was finished, he sealed it in an envelope and dropped it off at her apartment. As he walked away, he prayed that it would be enough to make her see how much he loved her, even if he didn't deserve her forgiveness. Daniela found the letter that evening. She stared at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. Logan's handwriting was messy, his words raw and honest. As she read, her tears fell freely. For the first time, she began to understand the depth of his pain, his fear of being loved for the wrong reasons. It didn't erase the hurt, but it made her see him in a different light. When she finished the letter, she set it aside and sat in silence, her mind churning. She still didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. She couldn't ignore what her heart was telling her. She needed to talk to Logan, not to forgive him outright, but to hear him out. Because despite everything, a part of her still believed in the man she had fallen in love with. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild what they had lost. The knock on Logan's door echoed in the stillness of his apartment. He froze mid-step, his heart pounding in his chest. For days he had waited for this moment, daring to hope but never truly believing it would come. Setting down the book he'd been pretending to read, he rolled his chair to the door and opened it. Daniela stood there, her arms crossed tightly against the chill of the evening. Her eyes met his, filled with a mix of emotions: hurt, anger, confusion, but also something softer, something that made Logan's breath catch in his throat. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice calm but guarded. Logan stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Of course. The air between them was thick with unspoken words as Daniela sat on the edge of his couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Logan positioned his chair across from her, his gaze hesitant but unwavering. "I read your letter," Daniela began, her voice steady but low. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about you, about us." Logan nodded, unsure if it was the right moment to speak. He decided to wait, to let her lead the conversation. He owed her that. "You hurt me, Logan," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "You lied to me about things that matter. Trust is everything in a relationship, and you shattered mine." Her words cut deep, but Logan didn't flinch. He knew they were true, and he knew he deserved them. "I know," he said softly, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back if you'll let me." Daniela looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. "Why, Logan? Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth from the beginning?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because I was scared. My whole life, people have treated me differently because of who I am, because of my family, my money, the way I look. I wanted to find someone who loved me for me, not for what I could give them or what they thought I represented." "And you thought I was like them?" she asked, her voice sharp. "No," Logan said quickly. "It was never about you. It was about me, about my insecurities, my fears. You were the first person who made me feel like I could be real, like I didn't have to hide. But I was so scared of losing you that I ended up doing the very thing I was afraid of, pushing you away." Daniela's expression softened, though her guard remained up. "Do you have any idea how it felt to stand in that church and hear you admit that the life we built together was built on a lie?" "I do," Logan said, his voice heavy with regret. "And I hate myself for it. I never wanted to hurt you, Daniela. I just didn't know how to stop once it started. But everything I felt for you, everything I feel for you, it's real. I swear to you, it's real." The sincerity in his voice tugged at something deep inside her, but Daniela wasn't ready to let go of her anger just yet. "You say it's real, but how am I supposed to believe you now? How do I know you're not hiding something else?" Logan's gaze didn't waver. "Because I'm done hiding. From now on, you'll get all of me. The good, the bad, the messy. No more secrets. I'll prove it to you every single day if that's what it takes." For a long moment, they sat in silence. Daniela studied him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. She found none. The man sitting in front of her wasn't the same man who had lied to her. He was raw, vulnerable, and willing to fight for their relationship. Finally, she exhaled deeply. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Logan. Not yet. But I do know that I love you. And that scares me, because loving you means risking being hurt again." Logan's heart swelled with both hope and sorrow. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you never regret loving me. I promise." Daniela nodded, her expression still wary but less rigid. "We'll see." The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of rebuilding. Logan took small but significant steps to show Daniela he was serious about earning back her trust. He opened up about his past, sharing stories of his privileged but lonely childhood, the weight of his family's expectations, and the guilt that had driven him to hide his wealth. He told her about his decision to use the wheelchair as a way to strip away those layers and see who would care for the man underneath. Daniela listened, sometimes with tears, sometimes with anger, but always with a determination to understand. She didn't let him off the hook easily, challenging him when his answers felt too neat or rehearsed. But over time, she began to see the man she'd fallen in love with again. Not the facade, but the flawed, vulnerable person behind it. They started small, going on quiet dates where they could talk without distractions. Daniela insisted on boundaries, making it clear that trust wasn't something she would give freely again. Logan respected her wishes, patient even when it hurt. Months later, Logan proposed again. This time, there was no grand gesture, no dramatic setting, just the two of them sitting on the park bench where they had spent so many evenings. He slipped a simple ring onto her finger and said, "Let's start over. No lies, just us." Daniela, tears streaming down her face, nodded. Just us. Their second wedding was a quiet, intimate affair, held in a small garden with only their closest friends and family. Daniela's mother, Evelyn, who had initially doubted their relationship, gave a heartfelt toast about the strength of love and forgiveness. Logan's family, humbled by the journey he had taken, offered their support with genuine warmth. As Daniela and Logan exchanged vows, there were no secrets, no shadows hanging over them. They promised to love each other as they were, flawed, imperfect, but deeply committed. And as they shared their first dance under the soft glow of string lights, Daniela rested her head on Logan's shoulder, finally at peace. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was real. That was enough. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with more captivating stories. Share this video with your friends and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're here, check out our other videos for more incredible tales. See you next time.